Good morning, everybody. This is Bob Moore with Oxford Computer Group. Thanks for attending our webinar today. This is one in the series of identity webinars that we're running, specifically identity as a service and identity as a cloud. So today we're going to share with you how we leveraged Azure to solve a pretty common business problem, we think. So with me today is Ken Hoover. Ken is a senior consultant with the company who's active in the project, and he'll be taking you through the technical detail. For the agenda, very quickly, overview of who we are. I'll give you a rundown on the client, what the business problem was. Ken will take you through the solution approach. We'll talk about how that approach can be leveraged into other organizations, cover some questions, but actually we're going to do upcoming events kind of early. So who are we? For those that are not familiar with Oxford Computer Group, we're 15 years focused on Microsoft identity. And in the past few years, as Microsoft has driven identity into the cloud, it's become critical to be able to manage identity, and I'll talk about that in just a second. We're Partner of the Year 6 times. In the past 2 years, we've been Partner of the Year, delivered more than 600 of these projects to all industry sectors, education, manufacturing, high tech, you name it. Identity has common problems. And we've trained over 6,000 students in Microsoft technology, and maybe some of you have taken some of our courses. So what we do now is we enable the business across a hybrid identity. And for Microsoft, they say that identity is a new control plane. That comes from Alex Simons, who's the program director in the Azure Active Directory group. So the one thing that allows companies to fully leverage a cloud platform is the managing that identity. And once you do that and you're secure and you know that who you have and what access rights they should have, then you can begin to do things like provide authentication services to applications, whether they're cloud-based or on-premises. You can have data access and data protection, put in policies on who is able to see and how you share that information outside the organization. And then that happens across all types of devices and systems also. So that is the infrastructure in a hybrid identity environment. And it doesn't matter if it's on premises, it's in the cloud, and it usually spans that. Once you've done that, and the small box in our little graphic on the right is cloud enablement, but that actually is the goal, to be able to put an identity platform in place that then allows you to leverage all of the really interesting technologies being developed in the cloud and do that securely and efficiently. And from the Microsoft perspective, that could be, if you're a media company, for example, Azure Media Services, a way to deliver your content efficiently, do it securely without having to put all that content delivery infrastructure in your environment. So then you begin to take advantage of things like platform as a service and collaboration. Real fast, what we have coming up, we have a webinar for our new training courses from OCG. Now, if you guys know, we're expert in Forefront Identity Manager, and Microsoft Identity Manager is being released in June. We've reformatted our courses, so we'd like to take you through what those courses are going to look like and the new modules there. So that will be delivered in this webinar. And then we have our Femme training courses that are still scheduled, and we're running through the 3 levels of those courses. So here are the dates. And if you want any more information on this or anything else from Oxford, you could email me or email Jackie Mount, who is the one who sends you all the great emails from Oxford. So now I'm going to get into the case study real quickly, hand it over to Ken. He'll take you through the architecture. So the client we're going to talk about today is a real estate firm, and they're a provider of residential and commercial and relocation real estate services. They're a large company. They operate in 35 states. They have 350 affiliated offices and 200 company-owned offices. They generate over $72 billion in sales, so they're actively making that happen between buyers and sellers. And their user groups are 22,000 non-employee agents and about 2,500 employees. So the business problem they were looking at solving was corporate IT was managing identity for all of those users, for the agents as well as the employees. And the problem was corporate IT worked a normal business shift, sometimes on the weekends, you know, they had hours on the weekends, but agents work primarily on the weekends. And you have part-time agents that might not have full records of their username and password, forget those frequently. What was happening was there was lockouts over the weekend when agents would do open houses, they would get deals, they'd write up offer sheets, they'd need to access the line of business applications from the company and weren't able to do that because they were locked out. And that was causing a disruption to productivity and agent dissatisfaction too, which is important to keep their agents happy with the company and moving forward. So that was a business problem that they wanted to address. Oh, and by the way, if you have questions, if you want to drop them in the window, we'll get to them at the end. Or if they're pressing, ask us to address them right now, no problem. So here's the approach that the client took. So they looked at Microsoft Azure for a cloud-based identity solution. And in doing so, identified other areas of need that could be solved. So the first thing was, how do we push out responsibility for password management out to the users instead of IT? So we were able to do that, and Ken will take you through what that architecture looks like. But then they were able to say, well, once we have those users out there, can we leverage that environment to be able to offer them single sign-on to our line of business applications? And certainly can. So they saw that as a value. Then they leveraged the productivity platform of Office 365. So that gave these agents Outlook and SharePoint and Office applications. Once they got there, then it opened up the broad opportunities to leverage other kinds of components that are being developed in the cloud, because now they have managed identity. So we think it's a cloud-based solution that can be leveraged across numerous types of organizations. We'll talk about that at the end, but right now I'm going to give it to Ken and let him take you through what the solution looks like. Ken?
Thank you, Bob. So, welcome everybody. My name is Ken Hoover, and I will walk you through a couple of slides just describing how we architected this and putting in how the solution's going together. So I have a couple of slides. We have the architectural view of the solution, both in the physical and the logical sense. The general idea is we're going to use Azure infrastructure as a service. These are VMs running in Azure. We did talk with the customer about and give them both options. The solution as designed would work just as well in an on-prem deployment using machines in a customer-owned data center or other customer provided hosting. The customer in this case had opted to go with Azure, so that those VMs would be in Microsoft's Azure Identity Service space. Some of the decision points around that were the cost. I think it was about $80 a month per machine. The flexibility, just in the ease of deploying VMs, and how quickly this solution could be brought up and put together. So next slide, please. Right, so this slide covers the major elements of the solution. I'm going to start. We have two larger blocks. On the left side is the components that are running in Azure Infrastructure as a Service. On the right is the on-prem environment. This is basically the customer's pre-existing environment. In between them, an Azure site-to-site VPN is established, so you have a secure tunnel between the Azure cloud and the on-prem environment. And we have multiple flows of information, and I'll go through them one at a time. I'll start with the blue arrow, which is basically taking the Active Directory that the customer already had with their employees in it, which are the 2,500 or so. And we created an additional domain controller for that environment that sits out in Azure, and that machine is the full participant in the domain, and it replicates just like all the others. the tunnel allows for that replication to occur securely. Having that domain controller sitting out in Azure also provides an availability improvement just in case. So if that tunnel goes down, there's still enough infrastructure out in Azure for that to work, because that domain controller, of course, is kept up to date. The other on-prem element is the application database here, which contains the identity information about all of these agents and other components of the service. There's an additional flow here, which is the green arrows, where we're taking, there's a Femme server that sits out in the Azure environment. Its job is to read identity information for the agents from this application database, put them into an AD that is a separate AD that exists only in this Azure infrastructure, so that there are AD user objects there. And then now that we have two AD instances sitting out here in this Azure infrastructure as a service environment, one which is an extension of the on-prem existing AD, and the other one which is just the agents, then we synchronize from both of those ADs out to Azure up at the top of the diagram. And so what we have is a single AD environment which contains the identities of both sets of users. From there, those users are then able to access the information that they need, use the log in with those Azure identities, use those Azure identities to get to the applications, the line of business applications, and also Office 365 services. And then the password sync is handled through the red arrows, that because we're using the Azure AD sync tool, we actually get password write back from Azure AD back to those two AD environments, so that people can use the Azure AD premium capability to do password sync, password write back. They get the MFA so that those password resets are done securely, and therefore, if it's 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon on a holiday weekend, and an agent has something that they need to get access to, but they don't remember their password, they can do it without the need for somebody from corporate IT to get involved. So that's a walkthrough of the significant pieces of this. So we have essentially two flows of identity, one from the on-prem AD, the other coming out of the application database, this SQL view which contains all of the agents. They go out into the Azure environment, this Azure infrastructure, and the agents go into an AD that exists purely in Azure. The on-prem environments go out to a domain controller, which is an extension of the on-prem AD. We have the synchronization to the cloud of attributes. We have password sync in both directions back to those two AD instances, and that way that holds the solution together so that the business requirements are met. Both sets of people have identities in the cloud. They have the ability to reset their passwords when they need. I'm getting a lot of noise. If somebody might need to mute themselves. Okay, Bob, can you go to the next slide? And so I'll just talk about this slide briefly. There's one of the things that was looked at during the process with the idea of doing federated sign-on for applications. ADFS was put in an intermediate stage of the design. The role here that ADFS is serving is not to handle user login, but in this case, ADFS would be routing the logins to the appropriate AD. You can see there's two Azure ADs on this diagram. And ADFS has the ability to route authentication requests to a target based on the domain suffix of the credentials that are plugged in. The final solution, which was represented on the first slide, actually uses a single AD, a single Azure AD, let me be precise here, and ADFS actually is not present in the final solution. Another element of this is the applications that the customer had, because the customer has, as like many large customers do, they have in-house applications that they have developed which need to be able to provide web-based services, and these need to be authenticated through a secure web environment. For this customer, the recommendation and the thing we went with was for them to use the Active Directory application, Active Directory authentication library. Which is a library, a .NET library that can be included with the and incorporate into the application to provide authentication for that application from Azure. And I'm posting a link in the chat box, if I hit the right button here. Give me just a second, which will take you to the page that describes this. This is a page that that has a link to the libraries for the different .NET spaces. So if you are a company, if you're here from a company that has a problem like this or might be interested in writing web applications that authenticate directly against Azure AD, or if you're a company like us who works with customers who have this problem, this is something you could recommend to them to take a look at.
Can we
Bob,
have a and there is a question, and the question is, what is Femme doing in the first diagram? So I'll just go back to that.
Okay,
diagram.
Go ahead back. So the job of Femme in the diagram, when Bob flips it back.
I might not get there, so go ahead.
That's okay. So the job of Femme in the first diagram is to read the information from the SQL view, which is in the on-premise database, and use that to create accounts, to provision accounts into the agent AD, which is sitting in the Azure infrastructure as a service. Does that answer your question? Okay.
All right.
So this is the Femme implementation is pretty simple. You have a set of, it's just reading the user information from the database and turning that into credentials in the Active Directory environment. That's a very straightforward Femme setup. Okay. So he says yes. Thank you very much. Okay,
Great.
Bob, back to you.
Okay. So just a summary of the solution components that were involved here. The client used Enterprise Mobility Suite for their employees because that enabled the employees to get access to all of the components of the suite, which include Microsoft Intune, Windows Intune, the rights management capability, and some of the other advanced features in Active Directory. For the associates, they used the Azure Active Directory Premium license and didn't license the entire 22,000 at this point, but is moving through a incremental stage, and that gave them all of the advanced password reset capability that Azure Active Directory Premium has. They licensed Office 365 for the user base, and then, as Ken had mentioned earlier, put some machines in Azure, so there's an Azure identity as a infrastructure as a service component here too, small one though. And then for us, it's about 45 days of professional services from scoping to doing the initial planning, configuration, test, and roll out to production. So we approximately 3 months before the solution went live. And so how can we leverage this approach? Well, we think that any organization that's currently managing identities for non-employees has this type of an issue, and we've seen it. They want to extend self-service capabilities out to these non-employee associates, and we hear this a lot, get out of the password reset and password management, identity management business for those users. It's cost and also risk. And they want to extend access to applications to these different user communities using that single logon, that single sign-on capability. So where can it be leveraged? We've seen insurance companies have the same business model, a small corporate organization with many agents, non-employee agents. In retail, we did a project for a hair salon company that had thousands and thousands of non-employee agents that were trimming hair in the salons with high turnover and an incredible cost of managing those identities. And then distribution companies that use outside sales forces that are independent to market their equipment. So any organization that has a very large population of non-employee users could easily take advantage of this solution. So the best part about it and what this enables for this client, not only are they getting through their near-term issues of productivity and reducing costs by outsourcing, by enabling user self-service and relieving the burden of the help desk, but now they've created an identity infrastructure like we saw on the Who Was Oxford slide that becomes the control plane that allows them to do things like collaboration, to take advantage of business intelligence, analytics, all sorts of new components that are being innovated on a regular basis, both by Microsoft and by the industry. So that's the summary of the case study. Do we have any questions? And if you want to come off mute and ask the question, that's great.
And, Bob, this is Ken. We had a question in the window. There's a question about whether AD Sync is syncing the employee ID only. The answer is we're actually syncing both environments. That's one of the major elements is you have one Azure AD environment which contains identities from both sets of users so that they both have access to the applications. There's a question about, why can't Femme provision to both Azure ADs or provision from both of those ADs without having to use the AAD Connect. That is doable. We've done implementations using the Azure Connector. The Azure Connector lags functionality-wise behind Azure AD Sync and Azure AD Connect, which is coming. It does not allow password write-back at this time, and Microsoft is actually deprecating it. And they're threatening to pull it entirely, which I hope they don't, because I think there are cases where it's useful. But it is not the right tool to do the job, which is the important part of this.
Thanks, Ken. Any more questions?
Yep.
Well, if that's our presentation for today. More information, we're going to post this presentation up on our website, and Jackie will send out the link to that. If you'd like to find out more, let us know. We're happy to talk to you about it. And anything else that has to do with identity, the Microsoft stack, or our new MIM training courses coming up. So please let us know. And we want to thank you very much for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.